Reverse proxies are a powerful tool in the toolbox of any web developer. In C#, we can add a reverse proxy to any ASP.NET Core web application easily using a tool called Yarp. In this video, we will look at what a reverse proxy does, then we'll look at how to implement Yarp quickly into any web application. Finally, we'll look at how Yarp can be used to make transitioning to a new website or upgrading to .NET extremely easy. Yarp is an incredibly flexible, powerful tool. This video is going to get you started with Yarp. What I'm wondering is if you want to see more after I'm done this video. So what I've done is set up a suggestion on the suggestion site titled Yarp Course. If you're interested in a paid course on Yarp, please go to suggestions.iamtimcorey.com and upvote that suggestion. That will help me determine if you want even more in-depth coverage on Yarp. And while you're there, leave a suggestion for a different topic to cover on YouTube as a dev question video or as a course. Okay, let's get started with what is Yarp? What is a reverse proxy in general? So let's say here you have your PC and you want to access example.com. Well, your thought is you just go right to the website, right? Well, not really, not in most cases. Instead, what happens is that you go to example.com, but you don't hit the website directly. Instead, you hit a reverse proxy. And that reverse proxy then sends on the data to your website. Now you might say, well, why would there be an intermediate step like that? Well, here's the reason why. One of the reasons why. There's many reasons why. But let's just say that your website is super popular. I'm sure it is. And you've got hundreds of thousands of people hitting that website and it's getting overloaded. And so what you want to do is you want to add a second copy of your website that half the traffic can go to, a mirror. But you don't want people to say, well, okay, if your name starts with A through M, then go to example.com. And if your name starts with N through Z, then go to example2.com. That doesn't work. You shouldn't have to tell people which site to go to based upon if they want to get to your website or a copy of your website. That's where the reverse proxy says, no problem. I will send half the traffic to your website and half to the mirror website. Okay, this is how load balancing works. And of course, the way that you send half and half can be random. It can be round robin. It can look at your website and say, hey, you're getting overloaded. Let me send the rest of the traffic to a different site. So you can do that in a lot of different ways, but a reverse proxy is a great tool for doing that load balancing. But that's not all it can do. Let's just say you're using this as a load balancer, but then, website one, it crashes, the main website. Well, no problem. The reverse proxy can say, hey, we'll just send just to the mirror site. So that's one cool example of what you can do with a reverse proxy, actually a couple. But there's more, because imagine for a minute that you decide, well, we don't need to have two websites. We're just going to have the one website. It's going to be, example.com and that's it. Okay. But maybe what you're doing is you're building a better website. Okay. And you say, hey, we think this website is better. We want to test it out with a small part of our population. Well, again, you can send 10% of your traffic to the better website and the rest to your main website. Or maybe the better website only does certain pages and the reverse proxy can say, hey, you know what? If the page ends in, /test, it goes to the better website. If it doesn't, then go to the old website. There's not just load balancing, but also splitting the traffic. So some traffic goes to one part, some traffic goes to another. Beyond that, the reverse proxy can also handle things like authentication, HTTPS, and all the rest, and then the traffic behind it doesn't have to worry about all of that work. So this website and this website don't have to worry about making sure that their authentication system is checking all the the correct things because the reverse proxy did that and you trust the proxy. So lots of cool stuff you can do with a reverse proxy. We're just going to touch on the basics of it today, but this reverse proxy right here, the proxy we're going to use, reverse proxy we're going to use, is called Yarp, which stands for yet another reverse proxy. So the idea here was that Microsoft realized that they needed a reverse proxy. And in fact, they were using existing reverse proxies throughout the organization, but they were all using them differently and they all had different needs. And they found that the existing reverse proxies out there just didn't fully satisfy all of the needs of Microsoft. And of course, Microsoft's a very large organization doing lots of different things. And so they created a very flexible system called Yarp. So Yarp is designed to basically do whatever you want it to do. You can adjust it, change it, tweak it to fit your environment. And we're going to see a little bit of that today. So let's jump right into the code. Let's create a new project. And we're going to start off with let's start off simple. We're going to create a ASP.NET Core Web API. Okay. And we're going to call this the pessimistic API. Okay. So we're going to call this intro to Yarp. So what's the pessimistic API? Well, it's going to be the standard weather API, but we're going to say it only returns cold values. Okay. So .NET 9, HTTPS, we're not going to use controllers down here. So make sure that box is unchecked. We're just going to use a very simple out-of-the-box API. We're going to tweak it just slightly. Okay, so coming down here in our program.cs, let's make some changes here. So the weather forecast right now, it returns a random value for the temperature, but it's from -20, this is Celsius, to 55. Let's change that to 5. Okay, so -20 to 5. And then up here for the randomly assigned summary, we have freezing, bracing, chilly, cool, and we're going to get rid of the rest of them. Okay, so it's just going to say one of these 4, and that's it. Okay, and that's it. So the /weather forecast endpoint is going to return 5 cold temperatures. Okay, now we are going to do one more tweak over here in the properties. We're going to launch settings.json. We're going to change the URL for the HTTPS version. I don't know if you could do this, but it's really convenient. So we're going to say that the cool one is 7200. It's easy to remember. I like easy to remember. We're going to have to remember it for later. So let's run this API and just make sure it works. Okay, so it launched, and let's pull it up here, and we have to type in /weather forecast. Okay, and this gives us cool, cool, chilly, cool, chilly. Okay, we refresh, we get freezing, bracing, freezing. It's only going to give us cold values. Okay, so that's our weather forecast. Okay, so now let's shut that down. And now what we're going to do is create a proxy for this API. And yes, proxies can work with websites, APIs, basically anything on the web, including other web technologies like gRPC or other. So let's right-click on our solution. We're going to say Add New Project, and let's go with an ASP.NET Core empty project. Okay, it's in this list, but I've used it recently, so I'm going to pull it up here. Note there's a whole lot of .NET Framework stuff in my recently used projects. I just completed a course on upgrading to .NET 9. It's a really cool course, and in that course, we see a little bit of how Yarp can be used really effectively. So I want to make sure we got this intro to Yarp out here as well so you knew more information about how Yarp works. So let's go with an ASP.NET Core empty project. And we'll call this Yarp Gateway. And we're going to say .NET 9, HTTPS, leave the rest alone, hit create. So now what's going to happen is we have a blank web app. Now, it includes the map get for the root, which just says hello world. That's fine. We're going to leave that there just so it shows up. We don't panic and say, oh no, the website's not loading or something. So let's just choose the Yarp gateway, run this, and we get a hello world web page. Okay, that's all it is. It just says hello world. Okay, so now let's add Yarp to this. To start, we're going to go to dependencies. We're going to manage NuGet packages. We're going to search for Yarp. And we get the yarp.reverse proxy NuGet package, which currently is at version 2.2.0. We install that, hit apply, accept. And now we have the Yarp package installed. We need to modify our program.cs, make sure it's in the correct project, not the API project, but the Yarp gateway project. We're going to add a couple of entries. So after the builder, the var builder equals, but before the var app equals builder.build. So between these two, we're going to add an entry that says builder.services.add reverse proxy. And then on new line, just for the sake of wrapping, we're going to say dot load from, and notice there's two options here, load from config and load from memory. We're going to load from config. What this is this is how the reverse proxy is configured. So we're going to load from app settings.json. So you can configure your reverse proxy in your app settings.json, or notice the in memory, you can actually pull from a database or put it right in code. However you want to configure your reverse proxy, it can handle. Again, very, very flexible. So we're going to start with from config, which is builder.configuration.get section, and we're going to call this section Yarp. Okay, so technically this is all one line. This is just what it looks like, and notice how it kind of scrolls off the screen there. So I just put a line return here. So this is saying add the reverse proxy, that's Yarp, and load the configuration from configuration. And we're loading a section here of app settings.json, which doesn't exist yet. We're going to have to add that, but that comes next. Okay, so now after your app.mapGet, which we can leave or we can get rid of, we're going to leave it. Just say app.map_reverse_proxy. So what this is doing is it is mapping out whatever it finds in the configuration. So if you're not familiar, in ASP.NET, what happens is we have a bunch of routes, and we register those routes with the web application. We say, hey, map_get this just slash, so it's the root of the site. That's going to map to a return of just hello world. Okay, so that's one route. Well, right here, it's mapping all of the routes for the reverse proxy. Basically, when we say, hey, when you go to this route, I want you to send it on to this web server or that web server. All right, that's what's going to do that is right here. So we're going to have to map out what to send where, and then this would load that configuration and say, okay, I can put that in my route tree. And then when people ask for a route, I know where to go. Okay, so if we bring up that diagram again real quick, we can close out that API. This diagram here, we hit Yarp, and it says, oh, you want to go here? That's based upon a path, or it's based upon some type of URL telling it, okay, I want you to go here. So if we put it in the tree and saying, hey, if you get any call at all, I want you to send it on to this website, then you wouldn't have this, you just have this direct. Or you could say, if you get any call at all, send it to this website or send it to that website. And then you have a load balance. Or you could say, hey, if you get, let's just put an option here. If you get /test, go here. And if you get /fun, go here. Well, now it's not load balancing. What it's doing is it's saying, hey, I know that if I get example.com/test, I go to this website. If I get example.com/fun, I go to this website and pass on to a particular page. And we'll see more about that in just a minute, but that's how Yarp can be configured in different ways. Again, we're going to do all of that. So that's our setup for Yarp. That's it. So we have load from the configuration, map that configuration. Done. Yarp is set up. All we need to do now is go into our configuration and actually put a setting for, or a series of settings for Yarp. So to do that, let's actually open it up and not just have it temporarily open. We're going to put comma here and then say Yarp. And that wording is important because of the fact that over here in program.cs, I said the section is called Yarp. So that's how we're mapping those two things out, is the section is called Yarp, which maps out to the section we're asking for. Okay, now in your mapping, there's two big sections. There's routes. Okay, we'll leave that empty for now. And then there is the second section, which is clusters. Okay, so routes are the paths you're looking for. So you say, hey, I'm looking for these particular paths, and that's what's going to get mapped over here in our route tree to say, hey, these routes we're watching out for. And then when it finds one of these routes, this route will tell it, okay, go here, and that's the clusters. So let's start off real simple. We're going to say this is the weather route. And in here, we're going to say the cluster ID is, we can give it whatever name you want. Let's call it API cluster. And we're going to say match. Okay. And inside of here, we say path. And then we give it a path that we're going to match on. So we're going to say we're going to match on weather forecast. All right. So when you go to /weather forecast, that matches this route. And when it does, you need to go to this cluster, API cluster, and go where it tells you to go. Okay, so let's go to this cluster here, and we're going to say inside of clusters, we need to have API cluster, because we just set up here, we have an API cluster. Well, there's the name right there, API cluster. So in the API cluster, we have destinations. And inside of destinations, we're going to say pessimistic, which is whatever name you want to give it. And then in here is an address. And we're going to say HTTPS localhost 7200. Remember that URL we set up before? That's in the pessimistic API. Okay, so what we've done here is we have mapped out the very simplest of a Yarp routing. So we've said, hey, if in like this name can be whatever you want, and it doesn't really have any value there. Neither does this really at this point. Neither of these really matters what you call them. It just, you give it a unique name, and it's held for documentation purposes. So we've said, hey, I want you to match on /weather forecast. And when you do, go to the API cluster. The API cluster has in its destinations only one destination. It's called pessimistic. And here's the address. So /weather forecast is going to forward the request on to this URL. Let's put a slash at the end. So, so that's going to forward on the request to this URL. Now, what's going to happen is we're not going to show the user what that URL is. And let's actually see as an action. In order to do that, we need to right-click on the solution and say that I want to configure startup projects. Let's start up multiple projects. We're going to start without debugging the pessimistic API and start the Yarp gateway so that we can have both open, both running. Okay, so we hit OK, and we're going to hit start. It's going to launch both of our projects at once. So if we pull it up here, I have here, this is the actual Yarp page. And then if we pull up the other one here, this is the 7200. That's the API itself. Okay. So now let's come over here and we have hello world, which that's that just kind of shows that's our Yarp system. And then notice if we zoom in here, we've got HTTPS localhost:7248. That's our Yarp URL. Okay. So let's say /weather forecast. Hit enter. Notice the URL has not changed. It's still localhost:7248 /weather forecast, but we're getting the API, which is saying freezing, chilling, bracing, and so on. So we're calling our API through this URL. The user never knows that the actual URL for this API is localhost:7200 because we just call 7248 /weather forecast. And there we go. So that's how Yarp in its simplest form can work. Now let's close this out. We can close that out. So we stop all of our stuff and let's actually talk about, actually, you know what? Let's start it up. Well, no, first you have to create a new API. Sorry. I want to show you loading while it's running, but we have to actually build a new API first. So let's right click on the solution. We're going to say add new project. We're going to create a core web API. We're going to call this optimistic API. And you can probably guess what we're going to do here. Let's hit create, close that out. We're going to go to our program.cs. Let's actually go to properties first and launch settings and change this to 7300. Okay, just again for ease of remembering what the number is. And then let's cut out all the way to here. And so now it's just warm, balmy, hot, sweltering, and scorching. We're going to change to positive 20 to 55. So now it's only warm temperatures. If we were to run this, let's just set this to startup project and run just this API to make sure that it works the way we intend it to. So let's open this up and we have to go to /weather forecast. There we go. Scorching, warm, sweltering, hot. And we refresh a few times and it's still just hot temperature. Again, if we look here, it's localhost:7300 /weather forecast. Okay, so now let's put this in Yarp as well. To do that, we're actually going to go to solution, right click and say we want to configure the startup project. We want to configure for multiple startup projects. We want to start the optimistic API without debugging. We're actually going to move that up a level. So the optimistic and pessimistic APIs start before the Yarp gateway. Doesn't really matter in our case, but doesn't really hurt. Okay, now I have not changed Yarp. There's no extra setting changes in Yarp. We're just going to start this even though I haven't actually modified Yarp yet. So now let's bring this over. This window gets huge for some reason. So we now have this where we can say weather forecast. Hit enter. It's bracing, chilly, freezing. We refresh a few times. It's always the cold one because we didn't make any changes. And it's always the Yarp URL. Okay, so I'm not going to stop anything. Okay, so and if we pull up our Yarp, let me find the right window here. Pull up the Yarp window here. You can see that forwarding is proxying to localhost:7200 weather forecast. So it's going to the correct location every time we make a call. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that in just a minute. Now, in my destinations, I have one destination. It's called pessimistic, and that's it. Okay, so it's my pessimistic destination. Well, let's change that and copy it, paste it, and we're going to say optimistic. okay? And the optimistic one is 7,300. Now, I put that in as a second destination in my API cluster. That's all I did. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. Now, again, I'm still running. So I hit save. And if you go over here to our window here, you'll notice there's an extra couple of mentions here where it says loading proxy data from config. So what happened is Visual Studio said, hey, there's been a config change. Go ahead and update your routes. And so it updated the routes live without having to make any changes or restart the app or anything. So now I bring back over our localhost 7248/weather forecast. I hit refresh, it's chilly. I hit refresh, it's scorching. Now we have brought in that second API and we're doing a round robin type load balancing on our API. Now, there are two different APIs, which is intentional to show off which one we're calling. You wouldn't normally have two APIs that do something different that are against the same endpoint, but this is just showing off that it is chilly and then balmy, scorching, sweltering, hot. So it's going back and forth between the two, but it's not just one then the other, then the first one, then the other one. It's doing a random pattern. So you can actually control that. You can say, hey, no, I want to have round robin, or I want to do something different for my, figuring out where to go based upon this call. You can even create your own balancer where you say, let me do some logic on which one to call based on health checks or based upon, certain database information or something else. So really cool. We're just going to do, this random one, but, bracing, sweltering, balmy, freezing. So it's hitting one, then the other, And if you look over here in our window, we can see that went to 7,300 here. It went to 7,300 down here, went to 7,200. So we can see where it's going and see it's kind of bouncing back and forth, even though it's not always, going one then the other. It's not doing a round robin. Okay, so that's how we can kind of take this to the next level, which is adding the ability to, go from one to the other based upon a load balancing type scenario. There's a lot more you can do with it, but that's the basics of Yarp, where you say, hey, here's a route and go to this destination. Now, you can have multiple routes that go to different destinations, and you can even change what the route name is if you want. So for example, you could, take away, you could say, hey, you know what, I'm going to rename weather forecast to weather and then kind of remap it over to a different one if you want. We're going to see that in just a minute when we do a bit more of a more complicated example. So let's do this. Let's actually create another project. By the way, you can have this source code. There's a link down in the description to get this source code if you want to download it. It will ask you for your email address and we'll email it to you. But what we're going to do now is we're going to add a new ASP.NET Core empty project. And we're going to call this our website upgrade. Okay, .NET 9, HTTPS, and leave the rest alone. Hit create. And we're going to set this as a startup project. Now, let's close all the tabs and let's open the program.cs. It has basically nothing in it, just like before. And just like before, we're going to modify this to use Yarp. So let's right-click on dependencies. We're going to manage NuGet packages. We're going to go to browse. We're going to say Yarp. There we go. Spell it right. Yarp.reverse proxy. Install that. Apply. Accept. Now what we need to do in our program.cs is after line 1 where it says var builder equals, but before our var app equals. So we're going what this is doing is configuring the dependency injection. So we're going to say builder.services.add reverse proxy and say load from config. And we're going to say builder.configuration.get section. And we're going to call it Yarp. In case you didn't know, this right here, we're actually getting access to the app settings before we do the build action in our file. So this is how you can actually get access to your app settings for things like logging or other things when you're setting them up in your dependency injection. Okay, so down here, we're going to leave the map.get for hello world in. We're going to say app.map reverse proxy. Okay, so that's all set up. What's this app going to do? Well, the first thing it's going to do is we're going to say that, you know what, IamTimCorey.com needs an upgrade. And so we're going to upgrade the website. Now, right now, my website is written in static HTML and CSS and JavaScript. I don't have any type of .NET project running. I kept it really simple and clean. So it's just a static website. But I want to upgrade that to something that maybe has Razor pages as well. But even for my tiny website, there's a lot of pages I have to redo. And we want to redo some at a time, but that's going to be hard, right? Well, not with Yarp. So let's do this. Let's go to our app settings.json, and we're going to set up our Yarp section. So actually, what we're going to do, we're going to come over here to Yarp Gateway and just copy and paste this section because it just makes it a little easier. I don't want to type everything over and bore you to death. Now, we've got some routes to fix. So let's call this our catch-all. Our catch-all route, and we're going to say catch-all cluster. Okay, so the catch-all route is going to be / and then curly braces * catch - all. This is a special route. And what it's doing is it's going to catch anything. So anything we give it, it's going to catch that and send it on to whatever our destination is. So let's get rid of one of our destinations here. We're going to call this the catch-all cluster, and we'll call this I am Tim Corey. So what's the address? Well, it's going to be my address, www.iamtimcorey.com. So there is our catch-all route. What does this look like if we run it? Well, it's a startup project, so let's launch it. Wait for it to launch. Okay, so here we go. It says hello world. Well, why is that? Well, because right now the main route is hello world. But if I were to take that right away, or if I were to go to resources, well, it's zoomed in here. There's the resources page because we didn't map that. Okay, so if we go to all courses is here. If we go to Tim Corey, well, wait, that's back to hello world. Let's look at that. So we can just actually close this out. So if we come over here to program.cs, we're mapping this route right here. Let's, for now, comment that out. And now if we run this again, well, it goes to IamTimCorey.com. But if you notice, again, the URL is localhost :7179. If I go to all courses, it's localhost 7179 / all courses. And if I go to resources, a lot of good stuff in here. If you go to resources, it's localhost :7179 / resources. So we've effectively just passed through all of the traffic from IamTimCorey.com through our reverse proxy. Now, why is that beneficial? Well, imagine for a minute that we wanted to, start moving things over. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to add some additional pages, Razor pages, to our site. So let's start with adding a Razor page itself. So we can say add folder, and we're going to say pages, and then we're going to right click and say add Razor page. Now I could have just said add new item, but I have to remember how to do Razor pages, and I don't know how to do that. This template will help me. So I'm going to add empty one. I'm going to call this /more. All right. So let's just say I'm creating a site that, H1 more info. We're going to have a paragraph here. So this is more info about Tim's courses. Okay. That's a really cool Razor page, right? Nothing spectacular, but now I've added a Razor page to my site. How do I add that in? Well, I do have to bring in the configuration for Razor pages itself and configure ASP.NET Core. Don't forget, though, ASP.NET Core is a framework that you build on top of. I've got an empty project, but I can bring in Razor pages. I can bring in API. I can bring in Blazor. I can bring in MVC. I can configure this however I want based upon my needs. It's very, very modular. So I'm going to add in here builder.services.add Razor pages. Not Razor components, Razor pages. And then I'm going to add a few things down here so we have them. App.use HTTPS redirection. App.use routing. These are standard things for ASP.NET. App.use authorization, in case we have any, but we don't right now. App.map static assets. App.map Razor pages with static assets. Okay, so there's the setup for adding Razor pages to our existing ASP.NET application. That's it. So this map Razor pages right here is going to find the more Razor page and go, oh, I can add that. So now what we can do is hit run again. So we come over here and we can go to all courses. Everything still works the same. But if I go here and say, let's edit my URL and say more info. This is more info about Tim's courses. So what I have done is if you go to the root, it's I am Tim Corey. But if you go to /more, it goes to the one page I created. So why is this beneficial? Well, imagine that you are slowly changing over from the old site to the new site, one page at a time. So maybe all courses works the same way, but you go into the C# master course, and it's actually mapped to the new site. You can do that using Yarp. You can map just this page over to the new site, or you can add new pages that are Razor pages to the site, and you can have just a few Razor pages, but the rest of it is that static website. Now, just to be clear here, in order to make this actually work, I would use a CSS and the layouts and the rest to make this page look like all the rest of these pages, rather than have it be a white blank page. But as you can see, the URL is the same. The user does not know that they're going to two different web servers for their stuff. All they know is it works. And that's all you want your user to know, is your site just works. So that's a really cool feature. But you can even go further than that. We're going to do a little bit more of a more complicated test idea, or idea that you might want to implement. And that is, what if you want to create a new endpoint? So let's go over here to here. We're going to create a new route. But that route's going to be a little squirrely. Okay, so we want to create a route here that what it's going to do is we're going to say /random. And when we say /random, it's going to give us a random web page. Well, kind of random. We're going to actually say only 3 different options, but let's pretend it's random, right? So let's set this up. So in routes, doesn't really matter which order you put it in. I'm going to put it in first. I'm going to say random route. And then at the end of this, you put a semi or a comma so that you have proper JSON. And then we're going to say cluster ID. And we're going to say random cluster. And then we're going to say match. And in here, the path is going to be /random. Now, there's not already a /random on my site, just so you know. But this will give us the ability to now randomly select a sales page. However, there's one thing that you may have noticed. If in the other example, it's probably a little bit more clear. Let's go over here to app settings for the Yarp gateway. If I said /weather forecast and it passed it on to one of these, but notice it's just the main URL, and we tacked /weather forecast onto the end, which worked out just great. But here, we don't want to tack on /random to the end. That page won't exist on my site. So we have to rewrite this path to be something else. So what we're going to do is after we say match, we're going to put a comma and then say transforms. If we spell it right, transforms. There we go. And this is actually an array. And here we can say, I want to say path remove prefix. And we're going to say / in parentheses or quotes /random. So what's going to happen is we're going to remove this prefix /random. Now we're going to add on something else to our URLs. And we could just say add something else as well in a separate transform, but we're not going to do that. We're going to come down here to our clusters, which need to have the random cluster. So down here on our clusters, we're going to create a new cluster, our random cluster. And wow, that entered it in and said null. Interesting. There we go. So random cluster, don't forget your comma at the end. But in the random cluster, what we're going to do is we're going to set up destinations. And we're going to say that we have multiple destinations. The first one is Blazor. And we're going to give an address. And that address, for now, I'm going to leave blank. We'll add that in a minute. But now what I'm going to do is copy this, paste it, and paste it. We're going to say C# master course and GitHub Accelerate. That's the 3 courses we were going to randomly go to based upon doing /random. Now, I do have them off screen here. I'll just copy and paste. So let me grab these URLs. There is the Blazor one. And then here is the C# master course one. And then here is the GitHub one. OK, so now what we've got 3 different pages we can go to whenever we say /random. Let's start this up again. And if we go to all courses, there we go. But if I instead say /random, well, it breaks. So why is that? Let's find out. To start, let's go over to our window right here where we have our Yarp forwarding. And ignore the browser link. That's not a problem. That's just my browser itself. But if we look here at our forwarding, there is an error in here right down here where it says load balancing middleware, no available destinations after load balancing for cluster random cluster. There's no destinations for the random cluster. That doesn't sound right. We should have destinations, right? So let's close this out and come down here and look at destinations. We have 3 destinations. If I spell it right. It's important to spell things right. So destinations. How about that? Let's try this again. Let's see if this time we can go to the right location. So /random. There we go. Accelerate GitHub. Refresh. GitHub again. Now it's Blazor from start to finish. Now it's GitHub. Now it's Blazor. Now it's C# Master Course. Now it's C# Master Course. And that might be the solution we're looking for, but I don't love the randomness. I called it random. I don't love the actual randomness. I kind of want it to cycle over the various ones. So let's do that. We can set that up. This is where, again, Yarp is incredibly flexible. You can do basically anything. Now, I'm sure by now you're looking at this JSON file and going, oh my goodness, that JSON file is huge for just like 2 redirects. Yes, but remember, you don't have to do it here. You can do it in memory. You can build up this, the clusters and the routes through C#. You can actually pull it from a database or something else. You don't have to do it manually like this, but this is standard for if you want to have a small Yarp setup. It's pretty easy. Okay, so it's just verbose. So right after we say random cluster, before we get to destinations, I'm going to put load, let's spell it right, load balancing policy. And the load balancing policy is going to be round robin. And put comma after it. So what this is going to do is select one, then the next, and come back to the first one. So we're going to loop through this rather than randomly choosing one of the options. So now if you go to /random, it goes to Blazor, then a C# Master Course, then to GitHub Accelerate, or Accelerate GitHub, and then back to Blazor, and then C# Master Course, and then Accelerate GitHub. So that's how we can redirect. And don't forget, we can still go to all courses. We can still go to resources. So with just creating this proxy, I can do a number of different things. I could upgrade this site 1 page at a time. I could also add new pages that are not attached to the site just because I want to add something new. I can add a new feature to the site that's technically somewhere else using Yarp. So this right here, this URL, this localhost 7179 could be imtimcorey.com. But imtimcorey.com, the actual content of it could be on localhost or could be on a weird Azure URL, and it wouldn't matter. So I could host this Yarp app in the cloud and make this the front of my entire website. And then for most of the stuff, I just pass it on to the quote unquote main website, but I could add cool new features like random. And now I have this random, pick a course, any course, and it pulls up what course you want to learn and, all the cool stuff in that course. By the way, within a couple of days, these web pages for most of these courses will be redone with even more details, which is awesome. Okay, so that's how you can use Yarp for kind of even more complex scenarios. Now, there is so much more. Like I said, Yarp can do a ton of stuff. Yarp is extremely fast, which is important. And there are some things that you may say, well, Yarp doesn't do that. And the reason why probably is because it would require Yarp to dig into the actual body of the request, which would slow it down. So it stays out of that as much as possible. But you can, pass headers along. You can pass on cookies. You can deal with all those things. You can make Yarp your clearinghouse for authentication for HTTPS. And then, in your backend, you can have different servers hosting different parts of your site, or you can, spin up new pages, or you can say, hey, you know what? We're going to modify this route to say everything goes to our server that's saying, hey, the site is down right now. You can do a lot of cool stuff with Yarp because of the fact it's sitting in front of all your calls. This is also a way that you can use Yarp to be kind of like the clearinghouse for your APIs. So you can have multiple APIs and they're all behind one URL, or maybe even you don't control all the APIs. You can actually put them behind your URL and kind of have one surface for all your APIs, and maybe even do some transformations on the different naming to make them all uniform. So lots of cool stuff with Yarp. Like I said, there's even more depth to go into Yarp. There's even more practice to do. There's even more different demos you can create out of Yarp. If you want more, there's not a whole lot more I can do on YouTube because it's going to take up way too much time. This is already, we're almost an hour into this just for an intro. So if you want more, go to suggestions.imtimcorey.com. Let me pull it up here. This site right here, suggestions.imtimcorey.com, this is the suggestion site for everything that we do. And notice right here, if you sort by new, there's Yarp course. If you don't find it, you can just type in Yarp here. And by the way, we're covering Yarp as an in-depth tutorial. We're covering that, which that's something that's been on the table for a while. We're finally getting to it. So that'll be checked off. But do you want a Yarp course? I kind of put a few things in here that might go into that course. Let me know, vote on that, and let me know if that makes sense to you and you want to do that. Also, in the YouTube comments, let me know if there's other things we may cover about Yarp and the different things that you want to see if it can do, or you want to see how to do it, and so on. This is a really cool tool. And like I said, in my Upgrading to .NET 9 course, one of the tools we use is the Upgrade Assistant. And the Upgrade Assistant has a side-by-side incremental upgrade. And what it does is it creates a brand new web app for you and just configures it with Yarp with a catch-all route that passes everything on to your old site. And then page by page, you can upgrade your old site or move your old site into the new .NET 9 and slowly but surely convert over without having to do it all at once. So really cool stuff there. You might want to check out as well. But lots of stuff to do with Yarp. Yarp is a really powerful tool to know, and it's something that if you're doing the web, you should know how to use it and know how to use it well. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.